Hi, welcome to our channel of IGNOU audiobooks, Indira Gandhi National Open University, School of Social Sciences, SOSS, Diploma Programmes, Postgraduate Diploma in Gandhi and Peace Studies, PGDGPS, Elective Courses, MGPE 006 Gandhi's Economic Thought, Block-1 Foundation of Gandhian Economics, Unit-1 Basics of Modern Economics, 1.1 Introduction. Economics has emerged as one of the most important social science disciplines in modern times. Its importance has increased because it aims to be a positive science, meaning thereby that it can present objective and scientific explanations of how an economy works. It also aims to be normative. Norms here do not imply moral or ethical stands on economic issues. The norms are in the form of offering prescriptions and recommendations on what should be done to cure perceived economic ills arising from the working of the economics. It should be known that economics evolved from moral philosophy, but slowly it started dealing with study of allocation of resources to production of goods and services and its distribution. Modern economics seeks to apply scientific method to construct theories about the processes involved in economic activities, and to test them against what actually happens. Its two central concerns are the efficient allocation of available resources and the ways of reconciling finite resources with a virtually infinite desire for goods and services. Modern economics claims that it tries to be value neutral, aims and objectives. This unit would enable you to understand the evolution of economics as a discipline, the basics of modern economics, some outstanding thinkers in economics, 1.2 Economic thought before economics. Understanding the contemporary world becomes easy and meaningful when we begin from past. In this sense, history of thought, and in this case history of economic thought, would be helpful in understanding the basics of economics as they appear in present. Similarly, it will also be easy to place Gandhi's economic thought in a perspective. A very well-known economist, Lionel Robbins, whom we will be referring to elsewhere also, said that contemporary institutions and contemporary thoughts are expressed through with the heritage of the past. For this reason, if we want to claim that we know little about the subject, we need to have a nodding acquaintance with its past body of knowledge, and also perhaps a little knowledge about people who developed it in the then given social situations. It is recommended that whosoever is interested in understanding more about economic thought, well up to the beginning of the 20th century, should read Robbins's A History of Economic Thought, the LSE Lectures. Published by Oxford University Press in 1998, these lectures were delivered in 1980 to 81 at the London School of Economics. Robbins calls the early economic thought as anticipations. These are thoughts that appeared not as economics, but which had the potential that led to the development of the economics as a discipline much later. Economic thought has two sources. 1. Moral philosophy from Greek scholars that had an element of economic thought in their writings, and second, ad hoc pamphlets or monographs written by theologians and officers in government that argued out a particular case. Interestingly, centuries later, even Gandhi also did not write on economics and was not an economist, but he wrote on an issue when he wanted to argue a particular case. There is one more important thing that one notes. Unlike the early pamphlet and monograph writers, Gandhi did not write any special pamphlet or monograph. He had mostly produced notes not bigger than 3 pages to make his argument. Plato and Aristotle are two Greek philosophers whose contribution to early economic thought has got registered. Both philosophers belong to the era before Christ. Plato was looking for an ideal state and responsibilities of people. He examined the working of the economic relations in the state and compared it with what ought to be. It should be made clear that he was not in favor of democracy. Athens was the center of economic happening, and it was easy for them to comment on the working of the economy then. Plato, in the detailed discussion, ended up giving idea about division of labor. Aristotle was not looking for an ideal state in the sense in which Plato was. His focus was household behavior, and in this context he commented on money and ways of money-making from ethical point of view. Interestingly, he approved the system of slavery in the household management. Aristotle thought that people by nature could be divided into two types, one who gave orders and one who took orders. The justification for slavery came from the belief that indeed people, by birth, had different nature. Nothing significant appeared in economic thought after the contribution of these two great Greek philosophers. Roman Empire followed in economic prosperity, and there is none who stands out as a thinker or philosopher who contributed to the economic thought. In the intellectual world, this period is called the Dark Age. The scholarships started reappearing, and economic issues also got attention only in the Middle Ages. St. Thomas Aquinas wrote, Summa Theologica. He considered the economic affairs of exchange and interest as sin. Nevertheless, the major discussion that occupied the debate was about the just price for a commodity that came up for exchange. These debates laid foundations for the labor theory of value. It should be noted that the period was 14th century. It is also worth noticing that the discipline of economics evolved only after the nation-state started coming into existence after the Dark Ages, and international trade picked up once again. This environment provided thinkers to contribute to the working of the economy. There was lot of discussion on money and related matters, and the mercantilist school of thought emerged. It contributed to economic debates during 16th and 17th centuries. With the emergence of the concept of nation-state, feeling for own nation became strong, and national policies received priorities over the local policies in economic affairs. The core concern of the mercantilists could be summed up in a title of the pamphlet that appeared in 1613 from a prison. It read a brief treatise on the causes which can make gold and silver plentiful in kingdoms where there are no mines. The best contributions came from Gerard Malines, Miss Eldon, and Thomas Munn. It is interesting to note that most of the persons who contributed to economic thought were holding some government positions in trade and commerce-related work. Malines advocated exchange control, because in the absence of control, speculations lead to deviations that made goods artificially dearer or cheaper. Such fluctuations were not favorable to the state. Miss Eldon had developed an antithesis to Malines and advocated inflationary environment to stimulate exports. The most important scholar in this school of thought was Thomas Munn. His book England's Treasure by Foreign Trade was recognized as the most important work of mercantilist school. Adam Smith, who is known as the father of the economics, considered it as the Bible of mercantilists. Though it may appear that the chief concern of the mercantilists was to make England rich with gold and silver, Munn's writings made it clear that it was all about the terms of trade, especially the factorial terms of trade, favoring England. Last in the series of anticipation is Sir William Petty. In a way, he laid the foundation of quantitative economics. He approved of the Francis Bacon's method of scientific research. Collecting facts and analyzing them to test hypotheses was the mainstay in that method. His contribution lies in combining the monetary ideas with political arithmetic. He was investigating and estimating the amount of money that was necessary to keep the trade going with full employment and constant prices. His recommendations for taxations came from this basic arithmetic, and thus Petty becomes a very important forerunner of economists who later developed systems. This section ends with mention of Josiah Child and John Locke on the interest rate debate that took place in the later half of the 17th century. The legal interest rate was 6% in the second decade of the 17th century. There was a feeling that it should be reduced, and Josiah Child was influential as the head of the East India Company and argued in favor of reduction in 1668. He referred to past experience and then quoted immediate experience of the Netherlands that had prospered on account of reduced interest rate. From the point of economics, the logic was not sound, but the argument was well received because Child was an influential person. John Locke, an academic and a philosopher whose contribution was more substantial in the area of coinage debate in his days and for his writings on property, was against the lowering of interest rate. According to him, lowering of interest rate would make borrowing and lending difficult, and this in turn would adversely affect the trade. His second argument was a welfare argument. He referred to the class of poor and widows who have some small investments and interests accrued to them was necessary for their survival. 1.3 Classical Economics. Before we actually learn about classical economics and economists, it would help us to learn about some thinkers and schools of thought who envisioned complete economic systems. Cantillon is the first in this series. He was of Irish origin and settled in France. In his book, Essay on the Nature of Commerce, published in 1755, he deals with working of the economy in first part, followed by elaborate discussion on the monetary and interest theory. In the third and final part he describes banking and commerce including international trade in an authoritative way. It may be noted that for the first time, an economist described the working of the entire economy. Cantillon was a successful banker, who could also describe the working of the economy just about when Cantillon was writing. A group of people calling themselves physiocrats was active in France. It was a sect which had regular practices in debating on issues, and advocated that agriculture was the main sector in any economy which could generate real value and hence national income. It believed that the economy worked in a particular way should be promoted. Dr. Quesnay, a surgeon turned physician, was the founder who is well known for his tableau économique. He, for the first time, estimated national income. Of course, there were assumptions. According to physiocrats, agriculture was the only productive sector. Extractive industry was later added to it, but rest all labor was useful but sterile. This work was followed by the work of Turgot, who wrote reflections on formation and distribution of wealth. It should be clear that by that time economics as a discipline was taking shape in the form of explaining how the economic system worked and how wealth was being created and distributed. Foundations of classical economics were laid with the writings on property rights. It was also the beginning of the thinking on individual economic enterprise. John Locke and David Hume are beginners in this tradition. The explanation of the systems in which the economic functions were taking place and were explained came to be known as political economy, and the focus on individual enterprise, use of labor for production, for a unit of output, and returns to the factors of production, etc., came to be known as analytical economics. Hume has contributed to both. Classical economics began with Adam Smith, who is referred to as the father of economics. Adam Smith is known for his classic An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations, written in 1776. The main inquiry by the classical economists was to determine the value of the production and its distribution. Robbins put it differently and said that the book was about theory of productive organization and a theory of the causes of economic growth. Smith was interested in theory of value as his predecessors and successors were, and he was also inquiring about distribution. His major focus was on how a country could create wealth, and what type of productive organization provided best opportunity for wealth creation. His concept of division of labor, which evolved while writing about the organization of production, has become a famous maxim in economics. He said, division of labor is limited by the extent of market. He advocated a production environment which allowed an individual to pursue an enterprise working on what was best for him and one that would yield maximum returns. He also advocated individual liberty and believed that the economic affairs were to be facilitated under laissez-faire. The state was to play a facilitator's role. He wanted the state to carry out all those enterprises which the individual or small group of people would not find profitable, but people at large would benefit out of it. The contribution of Adam Smith is difficult to be summarized in a short passage. His contribution to analytical economics and political economy was very comprehensive, and therefore he is called father of economics. It can also be said that economics started emerging as a separate discipline with the times of Smith. We will consider a few more prominent thinkers who contributed to the classical economics. They are Robert Malthus and David Ricardo. Colonel Robert Torrens, who is not much remembered and taught in the economic thought paper in regular economics courses, James Mill, his son John Stuart Mill, and Nassau Sr., McCulloch and J. E. Cairns. With Malthus, we enter into 19th century economic thought. Malthus is known for his theory of population growth. He also wrote on principles of economics and got engaged in serious debate with David Ricardo on issues of the day. Malthus believed that population growth was faster than the increase in food production. Power of Earth to produce food was limited. He said, population, when unchecked, increases in a geometrical ratio, and a subsistence for man in an arithmetical ratio. He then wrote the ratios as 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, like that constant additive factors 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. And so on. The numbers are given just because he had become known for this, otherwise mathematically he was wrong. What is important, however, is to understand that he was aiming to explain the law of diminishing returns in agriculture, land being a constant factor, and labor being the most important variable factor applied to it. Malthus wanted to argue that the increase in production would gradually decline. It should be remembered that the law of diminishing return was further polished by other classical economists, mainly by Ricardo, and this is a fundamental contribution of the classical economists to the subject. Malthus wanted to make this point because he thought that human beings did not behave, and especially poor did not behave, and they will keep on having more children, and eventually most population in the world will live on subsistence level only. The diminishing returns theory became so dominant in the times when classical economists wrote that they were termed as doomsday economists, and economics came to be known as dismal science. The hardcore classical economics was about theory of value and distribution in an economy. David Ricardo is the master draftsman of the labor theory of value. It started in the backdrop of the Corn Law in England, and the thinkers worked on various explanations. Ricardo's labor theory of value, succinctly put in his own words in On the Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, reads as follows: the exchangeable value of all commodities rises as the difficulties of their production increases. If then new difficulties occur in the production of corn, from more labor being necessary, whilst no more labor is required to produce gold, silver, cloth, linen, etc., the exchangeable value of corn will necessarily rise, as compared with those things. On the contrary, facilities in the production of corn, or of any other commodity of whatever kind, which shall afford the same produce with less labor, will lower its exchangeable value. Ricardo went on constructing the theory of rent and theory of profit from labor theory of value. Ricardian rent is even today an accepted concept for the part of profit that is made, due to advantage over the quality of the resource, given the same production technology. The labor theory of value had a problem. Even Ricardo understood that in production there was contribution of capital as well. This became more and more important with industrial production, where land formed a very small part of the production factor. The acceptance of capital added the problem of distribution on the agenda of economics. James Mill and McCulloch, followers of Ricardo, confronted this issue of capital and treated all of such capital as indirect labor, and thus reduced everything to labor. The other contribution of Ricardo was theory of international trade, and it has come to be known as theory of comparative advantage. The last most discussed of the classical economists was John Stuart Mill. He wrote Principles of Political Economy. Mill approached production and distribution differently. He believed that laws of production had universal applicability, whereas the laws of distribution were guided by the institutional arrangements in each society. Mill was also a distinct classical economist because he introduced the concept of static and dynamic in the political economy. His approach to distributional issues made him a socialist, although there remains dispute about it. The Fabian socialists claim Mill to be a socialist. But one thing is certainly established, that he was not a collectivist. He did not know Marx, and he would not have advocated collectivism. He remains an individualist, and his quest was that of explaining laws of production and distribution before turning to basics of modern economics. The contribution of Marx needs to be understood. Although not a classical economist, Marx has been one of the most influential thinkers who had impact on economics for all times to come. Marx is one social scientist whose theoretical position was accepted by political activists all over the world, and there has been serious attempt to put the theory into application. It is significant, however, that after about 80 years of serious application, almost most of human societies have found that his theory did not work. The collapse of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, is the case in point. In this unit, our focus is to understand his theory briefly. Marx also focused on the theory of value in Volume I of Das Kapital. The English translation of this original German work was Capital, a critique of political economy. He also developed the theory of wages. He argued that employers determined the wages as they always had better bargaining power, and they mostly kept the wages at subsistence levels and thus generated surplus value. He also considered the component of capital cost, which was the labor cost of producing it. Since the cost of the capital was the value of labor spent in past, the employer could not create surplus from it, and hence all surplus came only by reducing the wages of labor currently employed. In this volume, he did not tackle the problem of varying proportion of labor and capital in different industries. Only in Volume 3 he admitted, like Ricardo, that ultimately in theory of value it was real cost theory, and that it was indeed labor cost mainly, but there were other factors as well that determined the cost of output. Once the surplus value theory was established, he went on to build the theory of declining profit, theory of growing rate of concentration in manufacturing industry, and then there was theory of the economic interpretation of the history, the theory of class war. It is the class war, professed by Marx, which came to be accepted with great appeal. It is interesting that Marx not only developed the theory of value, wages and distribution for explaining the economic phenomenon, he also went on to build a political theory for action. His theory of value in essence was no different than that of Ricardo's last position, yet he became a revolutionary thinker in the world. Marx's theory got converted into ideology, and the whole world witnessed the rise of communism and socialism. Russia experienced a bloody revolution and the USSR was formed. Quite a few Eastern European countries became communist, and a communist bloc was formed and became powerful after the Second World War, which ended in 1945. Marx's basic purpose was to change the social system, like Gandhi, who also worked for social change. The basic difference is that Marx wanted to be a theoretical master of system change. He wanted to prove theoretically that what he proclaimed was inevitable and part of a process, for which he was only providing scientific explanation in a theoretical framework. 1.4 Basics of Modern Economics. The fundamental departure by the modern economics from the classical lies in showing that prices of goods and services depended not so much on the cost of production, but on the demand and supply of them at a given point in time. The foundation for this came from what Robbins calls the marginal revolution. It is due to this evolution that the modern economics was no longer a political economy, which still continues to be a part of economics, but it became an independent scientific discipline. We shall briefly review the beginning of the modern economics in the same way as we have done in the case of classical economics. This will help in understanding the thought evolution and continuity from the predecessors. The evolution of economic thought will continue until Alfred Marshall, the first master of modern economics, after which the present state of modern economics will be presented. Then we will present an idea about what modern economics is today. The modern economics is also known as neoclassical economics. This name was given by an Austrian economist Thorstein Veblen. The credit of introducing the marginal revolution goes to three scholars: Jevons, Menger and Walras. Menger and Walras had independently discovered the application of the theory of value to the idea of declining marginal utility. Jevons, too, came up with the theory of political economy, but it is not explaining the economy, or an economic system. Instead, it focuses on the theory of value in relation to utility. And a theory of capital, both are the core elements in the modern economics. Utility was something which was not seen as important in determining the price of a good. To put it differently, the classical economists focused only on supply side for explaining the price and the economy, whereas the modern economics saw and introduced the demand side. Perhaps this is what led Alfred Marshall to say the famous maxim, which meant that even a parrot could learn economics. It should only learn two words: demand and supply. Utility appeared in theory of value for the first time in Jevons' writing in a major way. It got established that utility had its foundation in wants. Second, utility is not intrinsic in a commodity. Utility is attached to a commodity when an individual thinks about it. Thus, utility is related to thinking about a commodity for a particular purpose. Jevons also introduced the concept of market, which to him is a place, an area, where all buyers and sellers come together. An important thing he notes is the absence of conspiracy among buyers. Nobody is influencing the market. Everybody has complete knowledge of the price at which a commodity is traded or exchanged. Then the exchange takes place when the relative scales differ, that is, each buyer and seller for one another has a commodity which is of relative high value. The goat with one person is more valuable to another, who has a stock of poultry, which in turn is more valuable for person with goat. In such case, exchange takes place. The modern economics thus begins with Jevons, where he boldly takes a stand that the origin of value is in utility and scarcity, thus dismissing the labor. Carl Menger developed the theory of value with utility independently. He and his two students, Wieser and Bohm-Bork, founded the Austrian school of utility theory. Menger differentiated between value and utility. Things which are not valuable may have utility. Menger explained the utility theory in terms of an arithmetic table. It explained the way that exchange would take place. Interestingly, Menger brought out that utility of a commodity and its units also help immensely in case of income constraint. Menger in this sense also introduces the concept of maximizing total utility with income constraint. With Menger began the measurement of satisfaction in economics. Walras, a French economist, developed the marginal theory, independent of Jevons and Menger. His contribution was in explaining the complete static economic system. It is necessary to learn about Alfred Marshall in this context. He was a brilliant mathematician. He wrote Principles of Economics among many other books. He developed theory of firm, which included theory of value and theory of capital, working of the economy at macro level, with money, credit and interest, and finally introduced the concept of equilibrium in commodity and factor markets at the economy level. None of this was complete, but Marshall's contribution in establishing economics as a science has been immense. Modern economics has immensely grown since the days of Marshall. Modern economics is presently defined as the study of how, in a given society, choices are made in the allocation of resources that have alternative uses to produce goods and services for consumption, and the mechanisms and principles that govern this process. Economics has become the study of efficiency in production and in consumption. Modern economics also includes policy studies, with respect to conflicting demands for resources and the consequences of whatever choices are made, whether by individuals, enterprises, or governments. Thus, modern economics is now a fully developed social science devoted to studying the production, distribution, and consumption of wealth. The study of economics is divided into study of various branches. Microeconomics is the study of firm, industry, consumer behavior, and markets. Macroeconomics is the study of the economy as a whole. In other words, it examines and understands the working of the economic system, such as working of the money market, taxation by government, and public spending. The macro concerns were very well explained and theorized by a giant intellectual named John Maynard Keynes. He was a key theorist in economics. His theory has been developed into a school, Keynesian school of thought. Keynesian economics derived from his book The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money, 1936, that explains the determinants of national income in the short run, when prices are relatively inflexible. Keynes tried to evolve a theoretical framework for failure of self-correcting high labor market unemployment, which was a result of low effective demand and reasons for unavailing price flexibility and monetary policy. His contribution came after the Great Depression in United States, and he had recommended government spending during economically depressed times to improve purchasing power with people so that effective demand could rise. After Keynes, two branches developed: New Keynesian and Post-Keynesian, and the latter survived. A feature of post-Keynesian economics is the principle of effective demand, that demand matters in the long as well as the short run, so that a competitive market economy has no natural or automatic tendency towards full employment. Contrary to the view often expressed, the theoretical basis of this market failure is not rigid or sticky prices or wages. The positive contribution of post-Keynesian economics has extended beyond the theory of aggregate employment to theories of income distribution, growth, trade and development, in which demand plays a key role. Whereas in neoclassical economics these are determined by the supply side alone, the role of state that was envisaged in The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith has almost been regained after the collapse of the USSR. The Keynesian school was confronted with the Chicago School, where Professor Milton Friedman argued cogently for market superiority in economic theory and policy. The Chicago School was a post-Second World War phenomenon which rose essentially against the dominance of state in the communist and socialist countries. The debates between the Chicago School and the Keynesian school continued to rage. Post-Second World War, the economic crisis world over saw the emergence of a mixed approach that the world governments took. The world witnessed the role of economists significantly hyped in the Bretton Woods Conference, where two important global institutions were formed. One was the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the second was the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, popularly known as the World Bank. We end this section with a comment by Partha Dasgupta, an economist of international repute. He says that the modern economics treats human beings with respect. To quote him, it does by trying to illuminate the various pathways through which millions of decisions made by individual human beings can give rise to emergent features of communities and societies. Since individual decisions are, in turn, influenced by these emergent features, e.g. rate of inflation, productivity gains, level of national income, prices, cultural values, and social norms, there is mutual feedback over time. This character of modern economics isn't, of course, new, but it has never been espoused with such abandon as it is today, and so, when the modern economist says he seeks a micro-foundation for some observation or the other, it isn't an admission on his part. It is an assertion. This is one of the new philosophical premises on which the modern economics is working today. The subject is of course still evolving and will continue to do so because it deals with human behavior, and therefore laws cannot remain constant as they do in natural sciences. 1.5 Summary. The objective of this unit was to acquaint the learners with basic features of modern economics. This is necessary to understand Gandhi's economic thought better, and also to appreciate how the modern economics has evolved as a discipline. We have done this by taking you through a journey beginning from the days of Greek philosophers and passing through the Middle Ages and entering into Classical Age, and then the modern, or the neoclassical stages. The unit also acquainted the learner with the process in which economic thoughts were formulated and embedded into the then prevailing societies. We have also come to know about the prominent thinkers during each of these times and shown in brief the premises, arguments, and theories they developed. We have ended this unit by stating that the discipline of economics is not likely to have any laws that would be constant over time, as in the case of laws in natural science, because laws formulated in economics are based on human behavior, which has been ever-changing. This also is the reason why there are constant criticisms of economic thought, and alternative thoughts keep emerging. In this light, we should be able to appreciate Gandhi economic thought. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.